Thank you, Karen, and thank you for having me at the conference. As you heard from Shira, I'm a business school professor, but I study technology and its impact on business and society and public policy. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is the field that I've been involved in the last several years called gamification. And I'll explain what that means for those of you who don't know. I'm delighted to be here in Israel. I'm actually here with my family. My 2 kids are out here in the audience as well. So for us, this is actually a game of vacation, as well as a talk about gamification. All right, so here's the starting point. When I say games, what do you think about? You probably think about something like this, a board game like Monopoly. Maybe you think about puzzles. Maybe you think about sports. The World Cup, I know, is on many people's minds, including here in Israel. Maybe you think about video games. But almost certainly, you don't think about the workplace. Almost certainly, when we talk about games, you don't think about school and education. And almost certainly, you don't think about consumer interactions in business. But the point that I'd like to make is maybe you should. Maybe there is something in games that is relevant to all those fields. And maybe there are things that we can understand from games and apply to all those kinds of contexts. And why do I think this? Well, some of the numbers are quite compelling. So this is just one example I pulled out almost at random. This is Cityville, fairly trivial seeming social game on Facebook made by a company called Zynga. And the interesting thing about this is this number. Cityville went from 0 to 100 million registered users, and they did it in 41 days. 6 weeks, 100 million people playing this game. There's something there. There's clearly something that engages people even in these very simple kinds of games. And that number is actually even fairly small compared to some of the more recent games. Angry Birds has been downloaded over 2 billion times. It's a big number. It's not only about 7 billion people in the world. 2 billion times for slingshotting little red birds at bizarre-looking green pigs to knock down their houses. What's going on there? And if you talk about even some of the more recent games, games like Candy Crush Saga and Clash of Clans, each generate over $1 billion a year in revenues on free-to-play games. So clearly there's something going on. And in fact, all of these are small compared to the most successful video game of all time, which I'd ask you to guess what the most successful video game of all time is, but no one ever gets it. Turns out the most successful video game of all time is Windows Solitaire. 9 billion hours people spent playing Windows Solitaire all the way back in 2003. Why? They played at work. It's more engaging than what they should be doing at work. So there's something there. And the question that my research and work jumps off from is, what can we learn? How do we learn things from what makes these games engaging and then apply that to things that aren't games? Apply that to things that are not pure entertainment and in fact have business and other applications. So that's this area called gamification. In many ways, it's a terrible term. It sounds a little bit too silly for lots of people. I often get these questions, well, okay, this is fine for little startups and so forth, but not for big companies. It turns out that there are many, many huge enterprises, governments, Fortune 500 companies applying these gamification techniques. They may not call it that, but fundamentally it's about motivation. It's not about the game. It's not about the interface or the enjoyment purely for entertainment. It's about moving people to do something. So gamification I define as the process of making activities more game-like. 2 things there. One is it's a process. It's not that something starts at one point and is not game-like, and then at a certain point it is game-like. We can always make things more game-like, even games. I watch the games that my kids play, and all of the games that they play, even things like Minecraft, which started off as purely open-ended kinds of games, are now gamified. They've got achievement systems, they've got point systems, they've got things to unlock. There's an additional game layer, an achievement layer built on top of the games because even the game designers realize that there are engagement techniques that they can optimize. So gamification is a process, and it's a process of making something game-like. And game-like doesn't just mean it has some visual interface, it's some fantasy world. Game-like means it's a set of rules, a goal, some objective in the game, and something that creates a game-like attitude. You care about achieving the objective. You care about following the rules, playing the game to get to the result. It engages you to make you want to get to some objective, and that's what's powerful in business context. So when I describe it in this general way, game-like structures that engage people, it's pretty general. And in some ways, this is nothing new. So for many years, we've had loyalty programs, reward programs, things like frequent flyer programs. Here I've got the Starbucks coffee reward program. You go and buy coffee, you earn some points every time you come, and then you get rewards based on that. Well, that's a game-like structure in a way. That is in some ways a proto-gamification. So the question is, well, okay, is there anything really new here? Is it interesting talking about gamification as a field? Is there anything that we have to learn other than do something like this? And I'd like to suggest actually there's a lot that's new here, really in two major areas. The first is we can study what exactly makes up these games. So when we talk about a game, you see the overall experience, but there are repeating patterns. There are atomic units, structures in games that come up again and again. Things like point systems, things like quests or missions that the game sends you on, things like levels, avatars, and so forth, all different mechanisms we see in lots of games. Now, it's not the case that the more you put in of these, the more fun the game is. They're design patterns. They're tools that you can use in different ways, and they need to be applied in the right way for the right context. But there are things that we can take out of games and look at how game designers put them into their games and apply them to other contexts. So here's a quick example. This is Empires and Allies, another one of these Zynga Facebook type games. And you see here the familiar kind of visual game interface. But if you break it down, we can see these various different elements. Things like the point systems, the idea of progression, the idea that there's a bar that says, here at the top right, you see we're at the beginning of the level. As you move through, the bar fills up till you get to the end of the level. All these are different structures that are common structures in games. And then we can take those structures and put them into something that's not a game. So this example is a site called Keas, K-E-A-S. It's a enterprise health and wellness service. So they go into large companies and partner with them, and typically they're health insurance companies, to try to encourage people to exercise more, eat better, engage in better health and wellness practices. Very important in the United States, where healthcare is a massive cost and is partly borne by the employers. The companies want people to be healthier. They want them to be healthier for better productivity. They want them to be healthier to save money on their insurance. But it's hard to get people to act healthier. How do you get someone to stick with an exercise program or a diet program? And what they found was just giving people the data isn't enough. This company was founded by an ex-Google and Microsoft engineer, and he thought, great, we'll do the quantified self. We'll just show people the data, show them what their health information was, and that will get them to change their behavior. Didn't work. Just showing people the data is not enough because we have all these psychological factors that causes us to not want to change our behavior. So what they did was they gamified it. They set up a series of quizzes. They set up a series of challenges, team-based challenges, using all these same kinds of game elements, quests, leaderboards, badges, and so forth. And they found a huge movement in terms of people's activity. In fact, they initially created a bunch of these little quizzes to have people go through, and they thought, okay, we've got enough quizzes now for 6 months. And people went through all the quizzes in the first week because they were so engaged in the activity. So that's an example of gamification. So one piece is these elements, understanding how to deploy these pieces of games and put them into things that aren't a game.